about, okay? That angel is Jesus. But when we get there, we'll look at that and we'll qualify that even more. So anyway, we find these are some of the conversations, if you will, that's going to be taking place in Exodus chapter 23. And the first thing we're going to look at is verses 1 through verse 3. Notice what it says here. Thou shalt not raise a false report. Put not thine hand with the wicked to be an unrighteous witness. So what's it talking about here? Lying and doing things corrupt to do harm and injury to someone else. In verse 2, thou shalt not follow a multitude to do evil. Now we use that a lot, don't we? A lot of times in our general teaching and preaching, we talk about following a multitude to do evil. Just because a multitude is doing it does not mean it's right. But a lot of times a multitude can put a lot of peer pressure on you, can't they? And people have a tendency to follow what their peers are doing. He says, don't do that. Don't become someone that is unrighteous, and that to become an unrighteous witness, okay? And we know that has been problematic throughout the history of man, hadn't it? Even in the apostles' day, they had problems with the people of the city and the rulers of the city and some of the people in general, where they go get these fellows of baser sort, it says. Well, what's it talking about there? These are people that will do most anything for anything. And historians tell us that at times there were men that hung around the marketplace and the gates of the temple that you could hire or bribe to say whatever you wanted them to say. It kind of sounds familiar, doesn't it? That has been a problem, hasn't it? You could say it's a problem. You know, today it's been a problem with the history of men. These people were a type of verbal mercenaries, if you will, okay? Amazing, Jeff, what somebody might do for 2 oranges back then, which was a lot of something to eat, wasn't it? You know? And that's what it's talking about here. And not to follow that multitude to do evil. And just as a side note, I worked with a guy many years ago, and we used to talk about the church and religion and things like that, and he was not a member of the church. And one day that he came in and says, well, I finally went somewhere. I think I'm going to go there. Now, he told me where it was at. I'm not going to call any names. But I said, why did you wind up there? And his exact response to me was, well, 5,000 members can't be wrong. That's what he's talking about. Never took the time to research it. Never took the time to look at it. And it is a major denomination there in Montgomery, okay? Major, okay? Huge, okay? I understand that if everybody would get there and everything else, that Brother Con on Sunday morning, they had 7,500 on the roll. Normally they had 3,000 or 4,000 between 2 services in attendance. So what are we basing our religion on? What are we basing our righteousness on? Are we basing it on the multitude? Thou shalt not follow a multitude to do evil. Neither shalt thou speak in a cause to declare after many to wrest judgment. Wrest judgment. Where have we heard that term wrest before? Well, we find that the New Testament tells us there are those that wrest the Scriptures to their destruction. Okay? They keep twisting and turning it and manipulating it to get it to say what they want it to say and not what God wants it to say. And they do that to their destruction. So we're not to wrest judgment. We're not to twist judgment for it to suit whatever our cause or means is. And a lot of times within the judicial system, unfortunately, we find those things happen, don't it? The whole thing gets twisted around to where it seems like the victim is the guilty party And the perpetrator is the not guilty party, doesn't it? How you can wrest things. You're not to do that. Neither shalt thou countenance a poor man in his cause. And so you don't want to do anything unjust to someone that doesn't have the means, in a sense, to defend themselves, or someone that is poor. You can look at that in many different contexts and light within this. You could look at it from the standpoint that you've wrested judgment to the point to where you've got the law saying you can take that which doesn't belong to you because this person is defenseless, and you've taken it and justify yourself. Well, you don't do that, you know? Today we call that fraud, don't we? Defrauding people out of something. And we see that sometimes people go door to door, with something that they're going to take something that's not rightfully theirs, okay? So you don't want to do that to the poor. Since the issue was a false report, it was proper to ask and require proof from the person bringing the report, and proof as required in the Bible from 2 or 3 witnesses. Remember I said about Leviticus and Deuteronomy? More detail, Deuteronomy 19:15, for example. Okay, and I'm not going to toggle within all of that. Like I say, we got material that we got to cover. This is why it's so important for us to choose our crowd carefully. Do not be deceived. Evil company corrupt good habits. 1 Corinthians 15:33. Yep. Here's a thought. It's easy and dangerous to turn aside after many to prefer judgment. You know, that statement's easy to do that. It's easy to give in, isn't it? And today's lesson's going to involve a cruise ship and a battleship. Okay? It's going to be real interesting, I hope. But it's easy and it's dangerous. You can fall into a trap real easy. If you're not careful, especially if you don't know. Just because your friend, your cousin, or whoever is going that route, and they're trying to influence you to go that route, you know better, but because of the peer pressure, I don't want him mad at me, you go that route. That's dangerous. Who's it dangerous for? Well, that person's already involved in it. It's dangerous for you, isn't it? You're fixing to get yourself into something you're going to wish that you hadn't got yourself into. And unfortunately, sometimes you can get yourself into stuff you can't get out of. So that's why you have to be careful, especially with people that's wresting judgment, that's telling lies, if you will, this way and lies that way, trying to manipulate something for their gain. It's easy and dangerous to turn aside after many to prefer justice, to follow our peers and popular opinion. When doing so promotes a false report or perverts justice, then it's sin. And I think that's what the whole thing is getting at. God has given this, when you get into all that, that is sin. It doesn't matter how you twist it or turn it. If it's perverting judgment, then it's sin. Any of you, brother, have any comment on that so far? Exodus 23, 4 through 9. I have to pull these glasses on and off because, you see, I have to have them to read this, but I can read that fine up there, see? So, read that got nothing to do with age, okay? All right, I'm just passing that along, okay? All right. Now, verses 1, 4 through 9. If thou meet thine enemy's ox or his ass going astray, thou shalt surely bring it back to him again. And if thou see the ass of him that hateth thee lying under his burden, and wouldest forbear to help him, thou shalt surely help with him. Thou shalt not wrest the judgment of thy poor in his cause. Keep thee from a false matter, and the innocent and righteous slay thou not. Boy, this is some strong stuff in here. We could spend a while in these next few verses. For I will not justify the wicked, And thou shalt not take no gift, for the gift blindeth the wise and perverteth the words of the righteous. Also thou shalt not oppress a stranger, for ye know the heart of a stranger, said ye were strangers in the land of Israel. Notice what he says here in verse 4. You know, some of this is really interesting about if you meet thine enemy's ox or ass going astray. Now notice what he says here. If there's a conflict between you, and sometimes there's conflict between people, there's things said and things done, maybe some bitterness has taken part, and if you see your neighbor's animal, a livestock, going astray, what do? You keep it because you found it, it's yours. I don't like him anyway, Jeff, so good enough for him. Not what it says, is it? Even though there may be enmity between you, what are you to do? Thou shalt surely bring it back again. You don't take that, even with your enemy. You don't take that which does not belong to you. And this has to do with their livelihood because, you know, the livestock world was strong in their livelihood, wasn't it? Okay? And if thou see the ass of him that hateth thee, now how about this? It's still regulating what is morally correct. You see a sharp contrast here between what sometimes people do and what God is saying is morally correct. You know what we call that today? You know what God's saying? It's your responsibility as a Christian, it's your responsibility, Israelite, to take the high road. Irregardless of what this person's done, somebody's got to keep calm, somebody's got to keep cool, somebody's got to have the responsibility. And somebody's got to set the example. You know, when this comes over into the New Testament, you know how it goes. If your enemy hunger, what do? If he's thirsty, what do?
Give him something to drink.
In doing so, you heap what?
Hold the fire on his head.
That's what I'm talking about. Go with it, Brother Con.
Yeah.
All right. See, that's the principle that's carried over it. Nothing's really changed. This is physical in nature. God is putting this together so he can prepare this people, and I hate to say this term, the best he can, because we know this was a hard and stubborn people, don't we? But God is giving them and telling them what he expects of them. That thou, surely help with him. How about that? Boy, that goes against human nature and grain, doesn't it? The human nature, and I think it was said best the other night. We've been having Tuesday night Bible study in the house, and it was said by one that was there. It said, it seems like for every action that God has, the devil has the opposite or the reaction, doesn't he? God says, don't you do this. The devil says, why not? Go ahead and do it. Nobody will know about it. Who cares anyway? He don't like you. Well, that's the devil's reaction, isn't it? So whatever God has, the devil has. And so we find it says here, and it goes back to injustice, is what he's talking about here, against the poor in his cause. Jeremy?
I'd say Christ kind of summed it up in Mark chapter 12. Look at verse 28 to 31. Mark 12, 28 to 31. One of the scribes came, and having heard them reasoning together, and perceiving that he had answered them well, asked him, which is the first commandment of all? And Jesus answered him, the first of all the commandment is, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy mind, with all thy strength. This is the first commandment. The second commandment is like, namely this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. There is none other commandment greater than these.
Yeah, so that principle is still carried over, isn't it? And here again, some of this is what? Daniel? It's easier said than done, isn't it? We have to study the Word and ingrain that and set our feet on the pathway, and we have to develop these things. You know, I don't want to get off on a tangent, but you know, when you stop and think about it, what Isaiah said in Isaiah chapter 1, and if my fingers will let me, if they will cooperate this morning, I'm just about there. Isaiah chapter 1, Isaiah says something very interesting to Judah and Jerusalem here in verse 17. And it's 4 words. Learn to do well. I don't know if you've thought about that. Learn to do well. You know, you get the picture here that it's a wrestle to do well. It's something you have to learn, isn't it? You have to learn to love your enemies, don't you? You have to learn to do those things. If you never embark upon that journey to learn how to do that, then you never get there. It'll always be, I just don't like them, and whatever I can do to get back at them, I will. That's not Bible. That's devil. Learn. He says, you guys have got to learn to do well. You have gone off so far away from God. You got your own ways set up, and that's not it. You need to go back to the Scriptures and learn to do well. Almost like it's not automatic, is it, Jeremy? You got to learn it, haven't you? How about that? And so this is what we're seeing here. And I'm going to look at verse 7, then we'll go back to those heads. Keep thee far from a false matter. Isn't that true? Keep thee far, stay away from it. If it's a false matter, put some distance between yourself and it. Because if you're not careful, you'll get wrapped up in it, won't you? It's kind of like this. Sometimes somebody might ask, well, you know, how close can I get to the mud hole before the mud gets on me? Well, best you keep a good distance from the mud hole, because that's going to depend upon if a Volkswagen hits it or a Mack truck. So, it behooves you to do what? Keep some distance, wouldn't it? Because if it hits just right, you're going to get the contamination on you. And that's what he's talking about there. And I was thinking about another passage of Scripture here, and it was in Psalms, and it won't come to me right off the bat, but anyway, I'll think about it here maybe in just a minute while we're doing this. Anyway, so that's what he's talking about. And notice what it says here. In the same sentence, and the innocent and righteous slay thou not. You notice how we could get in all this and stay a while? The innocent and the righteous you are not to slay. And if you're not careful when you go to rest in judgment, guess what you will wind up doing? Now you're guilty. Okay? Now you're guilty. For I will not justify the wicked. There's no way that I can justify the wicked that have rested in my judgment. It's not going to happen. And thou shalt take no gift. All right, you know what we're getting into here? Bribery. Bribery. You shall not take no gift, for the gift blindeth the wise. So what does bribery do? It'll blind you, won't it? You have a tendency to turn your back on it. You have a tendency to ignore it, and it perverts the words of what? Righteousness. Don't be taking bribes. Don't be manipulated into that. And thou shalt not oppress a stranger, for ye know the heart of a stranger, seeing that ye were strangers in the land of Egypt. And so what he's telling them here, you got to remember, you were oppressed. You should know the feeling. You should know what it's like to feel oppression. Now you're going to turn around and do it to a stranger. And yet you were strangers in Egypt. You know, this is really some thought-provoking material here to the children of Israel. And I'll challenge your thoughts today. What about our thought pattern today? Has a lot changed? Can you kind of see the principles of society that were laid down early on in these things and carried over into the New Testament? So where did the heart and mind of God change? One's physical, one's spiritual, but the thought pattern, if you will, the principle is laid down. And if you've noticed, if you go back and study history, most of your prosperous cultures that have been in existence until decay sets in and all this other sets in had some of these principles, maybe not all of them, but they had some of these principles in their culture. You just go back and look sometimes when you get a minute, and I may bring a brief lesson about some of the cultures that were in existence at this time because the Babylonian culture was in existence. They were doing great and a fantastic job. I'm going to tell you something else, another culture that was in existence that we don't think about. The Chinese culture was in existence. And these cultures survived. Okay? Now they wonder what turmoil and chaos because of decay, but my whole point is this. These people are given it in its entirety and its fullness, not in the partiality like they had it. They were doing these things by nature. Jeff, you know? So that brings you back to this point. Doth nature itself not teach you? Okay? So anyway, we can get off on that. So anyway, there's a whole lot to this. The principle is clear. How you feel about someone does not determine right and wrong behavior. Towards them, there are principles of justice that must be observed above our feelings. Remember we talked about, say, taking the high road, even though injustice has been done? That's what it's talking about there. You shall take no bribe, for a bribe blinds the discerning and perverts the words of the righteous. In the promotion of justice, God also commanded against bribery. Specifically, he commanded against the taking of a bribe, because bribe makers can't exist without bribe takers. So bribers can't exist without bribe takers. That's kind of simple, isn't it? But the command, do not kill the innocent and righteous, not only spoke to the need to protect life in the womb. See, I didn't get into that, but I've kind of touched on that before, hadn't we? See, these are lessons within itself. Okay? Because what you got to remember, nothing's new under the sun. That's Solomon. Nothing's new under the sun. When you go back and look at some of these things that were practiced from a historical standpoint, you'd be shocked. Nothing new under the sun. But also, there are instances where justice requires the death of the guilty and the wicked. So there are times when righteous judgment demands punishment of the wicked. You know, when you look at it, there's one thing that God has always required of man. And that is that wicked men are punished for their wickedness, isn't it? That their blood is shed. Wickedness has consequences, doesn't it? But what it's talking about there is, remember what it said up here? The innocent and righteous slay thou not. You know, sometimes we ought to take a 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. And you know, and we've talked about doing that before, and we've enumerated some of the things. You know, back in the days of Noah, the wickedness prevailed, didn't it? That man's mind was on what continually? Evil, wasn't it? You know what he doesn't list? He doesn't tell you what the evil was, does he? And you take that word evil and you put it on a piece of paper and you begin to itemize based on what you know about evil, and you're going to find some things in there that may shock you. Okay? It's kind of like this. The way you question things is this. Does it fit in the column under the fruit of the Spirit? Or does it fit in a column under the fruit of wickedness?
Works of the flesh.
Yep. Works of the flesh. Where does it fit? Work of the Spirit, work of the flesh. You know, and that's what he's getting at in all this. Anyway, laws promoted kindness and righteous civil conduct. Okay, and I think we might have covered some more of that. I hit the wrong button. It goes this way. Exodus 23:10 through 13, the law and the Sabbath year. Kind of interesting about this. The law and the Sabbath year. Verse 10, "And 6 years thou shalt sow thy land, and shalt gather in the fruit thereof." How about that? Go out there and work the land for 6 years. "But the 7th year thou shalt let it rest and lie still, that the poor of thy people may eat what they leave, the beasts of the field shall eat. In like manner thou shalt deal with thy vineyard and with thy olive yard. 6 days thou shalt do thy work, and on the 7th day thou shalt rest. Thine ox and thine ass may rest, and thy son or thy handmaid and stranger may be refreshed. And in all those things that I have said unto you, be circumspect, and make no mention of the name of other gods, neither let it be heard out of their mouth." So what were they to do? You know, you find on the 7th day who rested? God did. So have you noticed here, 6 years of planting and harvest, the 7th year the land was to rest. And anything that was left there, it was okay for the poor and the beasts of the field to glean anything that was left or came up naturally. It's kind of interesting, isn't it, about that? And you know, one of the things that we're going to get into, may not get to it today, probably won't, but you're going to find because of a violation of the 7th year principle was going to leave some dire consequences on Israel in the future because they did not abide by it. It's going to get real interesting before it gets any duller, and I'm going to have to. I'm just going to go ahead and do this. 6 years you shall sow your land. The principle of the Sabbath applied to more than just the work week. There were Sabbath years where the land was to rest and lie fallow 1 year out of 7. The law of the Sabbatical year, this was unique in the world and associated only with Israel. This was something that was given to them because everybody else cultivated right on through, okay? Also applied to the animals. You notice that about the ox resting and all like that? That the poor of your people may, one reason God commanded the Sabbath year was to give the poor something to eat. And that they were allowed to harvest and process that which grew unplanted, that came up, naturally from the leftover grain in the field, from the fallow ground. This was a way to help the poor that demanded both that the landowners hold themselves back from maximum profit and that the poor work to help protect themselves. Something else went on here that we've talked about. What also was to happen in this Sabbath year? The indentured servants were what? Released. So if these indentured servants were released, this gave them opportunity to have what? Food. And to start life over again, if they so choose to leave, or if they so chose to leave the master. It's one or the other anyway. English was not my subject, okay? My English teacher said, "Bobby, just no hope." So anyway, I guess I lived up to it. Anyway, so there's a lot of things going on that is involved in what's going on here. Not just keeping that, it was given for a reason on those things. Failure of Israel to give, we need to get to it. Failure of Israel to give the land its Sabbath years determined the certainty and duration of Babylon exile. Leviticus 26, remember what I said? There's other scriptures that get into all this that we don't have the time or luxury Leviticus 26, 32 through 35, 2 Chronicles 36, 21, if you want to turn over and look. And so we find that, this is the failure for them to follow and abide in God's word is going to suffer some consequences, even not abiding by the Sabbath year law. And that's going to determine some consequences for them in the future. So one of the things that we see here is that God is telling them there's consequences for not following those things. Interesting. It says, make no mention of the name of other gods. We've already heard that when verbally given the Ten Commandments, right? And this is still being given verbally and stuff like that. We're not going to get into the stone until chapter 24, okay? So anyway, it says, and let me go there to verse 13. I'm going to stop there because we got to get ready for the worship service, and I'm going to be doing the speaking there too. So, and in all things that I have said unto you, be circumspect, and make no mention of the name of other gods, neither let it be heard out of your mouth. Make no mention of it. The Sabbath was to be dedicated to the Lord God and not to any foreign or false god. He didn't even want them to utter the name of any false god. Don't even make mention of it. Don't even speak it. Blot it out of your life. And I'm going to stop right there. We got about 2 minutes before class is over. I've got a couple of things that I've got to do, and Daniel, we need to reset for the worship service. And we'll pick up there next week, okay?